Welcome back to the channel. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and if you guys got any questions, leave a comment below. Today, I'm joined with my friend Alex Gould. We're going to discuss a couple of topics for you guys, topics that are quite prevalent in today's day and age, and I think are very important to talk about. First topic I want to discuss with you is, of course, politics. Now, we've just seen a Democratic win, a huge shift in the States, and with that comes the very first female vice president. Now, what are your thoughts on the 2020 election, and what are your thoughts on American politics versus the way Australia does politics?
Look, man, it's been pretty wild few weeks. It's been a lot of breath holding for a lot of people, not just in the United States, but in the rest of the world. You know, we're talking about as much as we like to rag on the United States, and a lot of countries love to hate the United States, they are essentially the leader of the free world in many extent, and what they do has repercussions and on a lot of countries. Like Australia's foreign policy has changed significantly in the last 4 years of being under of the United States being under the Donald Trump regime. You know, we've had to adjust our foreign policy to meet the needs of Australian security, because we've sort of looked at the United States and we're like, oh, are we still going to be able to rely on the United States for our security needs, which we've been heavily reliant on. And in the short term, I think it's been difficult for us, but in the medium to long term, I reckon it will benefit Australia quite significantly, because we're adjusting our foreign policy to be more independent, to take into consideration the needs of our security for the long term, facing countries that are more belligerent than what we've been used to, you know, and adjusting to that. And I think we're also going to see us move towards taking on more of a middle power role, where as a country, I feel we've always had a lot of issues with tall poppy syndrome, in that we like to bring down those that try to achieve high, because we are a very egalitarian society. But now I think we're realizing more as a nation that we are a middle power, and not just a bottom feed middle power. We are a significant middle power that has a bit of weight around us. We used to be a lot better in the 90s and early 2000s in the soft power that we had. I think we've lost a lot of that because we've become complacent. But the last 4 years, whilst has been quite hectic with under United States leadership, I think it's been better for Australia in the long run, and what we're going to move into the future and trying to achieve. And we're taking more responsibility for the security of our region, and not just solely relying on the United States. You see the Quad taking center stage, where it sort of got together once in 2008, 2009. So the Quad, just explain, is India, Japan, United States, and Australia. So those are three significant democracies within the region, quite powerful democracies. And it started off as just as a talk to cooperate together as these four democracies. And that has, because of the aggression of China, that has become more significant in recent years. And they're talking more seriously now and getting more involved in how do they maintain the security of this region. I think Australia is a big proponent of the Quad movement. China has voiced very strong opinions against that because they see it as ganging up on China. Obviously, we've been very political in how we worded it, and it's just we're wording it as democracies are working together to ensure the security and stability of the region. So it's been quite fascinating. In terms of the elections, I think it's been a good outcome for not just the United States, but for Australia. I'm quite apolitical in my thought processes, so I was never pro-Trump or pro-Biden. Like, whatever the outcome, the world will still continue to turn, you know, like institutions will find a way of, especially democratic institutions, will find a way to just deal with whoever the leader is. That's probably the great thing about democracies. It's the will of the people, and we've been around long enough, especially a democracy like the United States, which is probably one of the oldest democracies in the world. It's been around long enough that it's had to deal with plenty of crises. It went through the American Civil War, you know, they've had amendments to the Constitution. So the Constitution is built with institutions that keep checks and balances. So even if you have a bit of a rogue president, like, that's right, it's still, and I think that's gone to demonstrate that it can, in certain regards, contain a rogue president, and the will of the people was exercised in the election of a new president. Because predominantly we've seen in history, historically, we've always seen 2-term presidents.
Yes.
But this has broken the mold.
Yes.
And it's been a 1-term president, and he's been gotten rid of, and after how he's conducted himself in the last 4 years, and people thought maybe the electoral college will flip. Electoral college did flip, and they voted according to what the people voted.
That's right, and it's so important, I think, when people are voting for a particular party to understand what the policies are, what the intent is, and what the long-term strategic goals are. Because I think a lot of people get too emotionally invested in a certain face of the party, a certain person who has certain promises towards the people. I think the more important thing is to have a look at what the party stands for and what the sort of long-term goals are. Because at the moment, what we need to focus on, in my opinion, is dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, because in the US, as you've seen compared to Australia, the numbers are staggering. I understand, compared to our 25 million people population, they have 330 million, which is quite significantly larger in population. So containing that is a bit harder, but also lowering the carbon footprint, because as we've seen, global warming is a thing, and we need to deal with it more swiftly now than ever before. Do you think the new kind of Democratic Party / the current leadership here in Australia have the tools to deal with it?
As it is, that's quite a hard question.
Of course.
For me personally, I feel the political will is still not there. And as a society, we're still not pushing hard enough. It's sort of like one of those, people sort of jump along. I feel more of that's a nice trend, unless they are directly affected by the effects of global warming or climate change. And in Australia, we're quite secure as a nation, and we have good security. And yes, we had the bushfires. Yes, we've got floods, but we can't forget we also have a massive social safety net, because we're such a wealthy country that we can support our people. So then when something really bad happens, we sort of it's happened, we deal with it when it happens, but then it sort of takes a back seat, and then we forget what just happened, because we have all that safety net to support our people, and then get them on the road again, get them on their feet again. Whereas I think countries that are poorer, that don't have those safety features, will feel the effects a lot more of climate change, but because they're poor countries, they don't have the influence either. So I think, unfortunately, might just be something that things will just continue to get more severe. One big influencer that is rarely talked about. So I did some research into this when I was at uni. It's quite fascinating, and I've been reading quite a few articles too, and it's the influence of lobbying and political party donations, which is something we seldom talk about. And out of the Five Eyes of the English-speaking countries, Australia and the United States are the worst for political influence of major corporations and lobby groups. So in United Kingdom, Canada, and New Zealand, if there's a political party donation, for instance, the longest they can wait to report, I think it might be New Zealand or the UK. I think the longest waiting time is 1 week. So you have to report within a week a particular political party donation, and how much the donation was, who made the donation. And the whole point of that is that they sort of can relate that to not having an influence or undue influence on public policy. In Australia, it's 3 months. So you can make a political party donation, and that reporting doesn't occur for 3 months. There was a whole Senate inquiry into this, and the Senate inquiry came back saying that under the current system of political party donation reporting, how political party donations work, there is potential to be undue influence on the political system and on public policy. Basically, that's a nice way of saying corruption can occur through this system, because if you make there's an important public policy coming up that affects a major corporation, they might make that donation 3 months in advance, so they can see an outcome that favors their outcome, but it doesn't necessarily is in the best interest of the public interest. And in the US, it's even significantly worse. There were scientific studies done in 2014 that looked on the effects of lobby groups. And most of the times they found, based on the statistics, that the average citizen basically has no power over public policy. It was all lobby groups that were driving public policy outcomes, and their outcomes were most of the time were not favorable to the public, and it didn't. So
it's essentially a flawed system.
It is.
And if you were in power, how would you fix that flawed system?
that's the thing. It's you need a lot of political power or political willpower to fix that flawed system. They've described like some historians are describing the United States as like as like a facade for representative democracy, but really it's an oligarchy of just major corporations and wealthy elite that just run and rule the country, and they just make it appear as
that's right, because businesses, we've all seen this, have such great influence over what happens. Companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, they have significant influence what happens politically and globally. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, and it's always been a problem in the US. Like, look at it historically, like the first motor vehicles that were invented, for instance, were electric cars. Electric vehicles have been around since the dawn of the motor vehicle. The reason they made them powered by fuel was because the oil companies were like, well, back there was just the one oil company before it got broken up. We're like, well, no, we need something that we can sell oil to, and cars are a good way to go about it. So they scrapped the whole electric car, and they came up with motor engines that run on petrol. You know, so we could have had electric cars. Like, you know, we're all about talking about electric cars now and how it's a fancy new invention. It's like it's been around for like 100 years.
And I've learned this in economics as well. It's all about allocation of scarce resources. There's only a finite amount of resources, a finite amount of labor that's available to put things into action for us to gain a particular outcome, right? So it's all about where our priorities lie. Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
where the country's priorities are and where our resources are going to, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Do you have anything further to add on that?
Nah, man. It's just. I think it's just a tough basket when it comes to solving climate change. But I'm hoping there will be more political will within our generation, because we're sort of under the previous generation's rule at the moment, and our generation is sort of only just coming on to take the mantle of responsibility for our generation, the next generation. And I think a lot of people are considering seriously, is like, do I want to have kids now?
That's
for instance, because like, do I want to bring them into this world? And I think that's where as we get, and there's also a lot more that we want to do now. Like, we want to travel, we want to experience a lot more in life, and kids sort of hinder that. Like previous generations, like straight out of high school, you with your true love, you're having kids a lot younger. Nowadays, my friendship group, like I'm nearly 30, in my friendship group, nobody is even married. Like,
that's
nobody
right.
has kids.
Whereas if we wind back, say 30, 40 years, you know, you went to university, you had a family, you had kids, so on and so forth, you paid off your mortgage, it was a set kind of pattern of behavior for people. And now I think that set pattern is slowly breaking. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, but at the moment, for me, it's more just there's certain lifestyles they want that, but my kids are going to prohibit that. Like, I'd love to have kids, but then as I get older and as I see the state of the world too, another factor that's going to come into whether or not I'm going to have kids is like, well, is this the kind of world I want to bring them into? Is that fair to another human if there's so many problems and I haven't even done anything to try to fix these problems, or my generation hasn't, and then we're just going to keep lumping all these problems onto the next generation.
That's right, and these problems add up, and then, you know, by the time we hit 20 or 30 years into the future, we might have so many of these problems that's irreversible. That's why I think it's up to us now to start heavily solving the climate change problem, because, you know, weather events are getting more turbulent, they're getting more frequent. If we want to enjoy this planet, and we haven't been able to get off it yet, we have to put things into place. Like, same with you, I'm not going to pick a particular, you know, left or right wing side, but I will say that what we do as humans here on Earth will directly affect us in the future, no matter what. So we have to take action now, because we've seen a massive degradation in our environment and our weather patterns, which is affecting our human life. So that's why I think politics comes in. With the right agenda, I think we can get through this. What do you think?
Absolutely, and I think we also need to change our perspectives on politics. So nowadays, you talk to the average person and you say, I have an interest in politics, they automatically jump to party politics. They automatically jump to whether you're a Liberal voter or a Labour voter. And I think we need to change that. Like, if you look at the history and the root of politics, it's about public interest. That's what politics is about. It's having an interest in your society, how we choose to govern ourselves as a people, regardless of who the political parties are. And I think that's what the change needs to occur within the psyche of modern politics. We should stop looking at it as like something that's boring and looking at more as like, this is how we choose to govern ourselves as people. This is how we choose to run society, and we need better policies that will ensure like we can continue to enjoy the kind of lifestyles that we do for not just for us but for future generations.
That's right.
So I think the conversation needs to change, and like because I take quite an interest in it. So I get a lot of friends that ask like, "Oh, who are you voting for? What do you think of this political party?" I never give an answer. My simple answer is go read their policies.
That's right.
What are their policies? Vote for the policies.
That's right. And a lot of people, like I've seen out of my friends group, seem to just vote for the face.
Yeah.
They'll say, okay, I'm voting for this person because, you know, they've smiled more on camera than the other,
Yeah.
or because my friends have voted for this person, or simply because, you know, my family's voted for this party their whole life,
Yeah.
so I'll do the same. But do you actually understand what that party stands for and what that party's going to push if they are in power? So I think a lot of people need to re-educate themselves, take a step back and really think, okay, if I'm going to make my vote count, I better do the proper research. And yeah, you probably agree with me there.
And also look at who the ministers are too, especially in a country like Australia. Like I love it whenever we have like a leadership change, for instance, and people lose their minds like, I didn't vote for that prime minister. It's like, you did not vote for that prime minister. You never vote for the prime minister. The prime minister is chosen by his party. You know, you choose your local representative to represent you in parliament. That's all you do. And people seem to not understand that basic concept. And I suppose a lot, like, you know, yes, whilst people are ignorant, I think a lot of it too comes down to our whole education system. And our education system is so flawed, and there needs to be a complete overhaul. Like, it's based on an old rudimentary system of replacing the workforce. That's what our education system's designed to do. It's not designed for people to live their dreams and aspire to become better. It's designed for parents to have kids, and they need to have more kids in order to replenish the workforce so that we can continue economic growth and continue to be prosperous. That's all the system's designed to do. And when you have a system like that, the education system puts on the backbench ideas and like promoting people having ideas and wanting to change the world and aspiring to change the world.
It's that tall poppy syndrome that you talked about before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Whereas we need to change up that system. We need to get our kids interested in the political process and the political system. Like I said, I think the counter argument is like, oh, but like schools should be apolitical. Absolutely, but get them interested in the policies of the country and how the country functions and how our electoral system functions, how our government functions, what is the history of our democratic process, you know?
That's right.
Democracy is such a fragile thing. Like, people think it's a set and forget system, but it's not. I always like to think of it as a garden, and it needs pruning, it needs working on. And if you stop working on your garden, then eventually it'll just become overgrown.
Yeah, absolutely. And
it's and democracy, representative democracy, is participatory. And you need to be involved in the whole process. So people get upset, for instance, when we have mandatory voting. So that was really fascinating. I used to run this group called Pub Politics. We'd go to the pub, we'd get on the beers, and we'd just like have debates over things. And then I'd always a week before, I'd always come up with a topic that to get people thinking about this idea. And the best part was, you would always, like, you know who the people that are going to be big talkers are, but the best one would always be the quiet ones that you didn't expect to have an opinion, or like the biggest like bogans that just didn't really care, and then they'd actually drop some legit answers, and you're like, wow. And I had my opinions change on this with regards to our mandatory voting system. It was by one of my best mates, and so I never took him one to care much about politics. He just seemed like the bloke that he just likes to get on the beers.
Yeah,
you know?
Of course, yeah.
But then he was there, and he sat there, and he listened to everybody. He was just gobbing off a bit, and then he's like, and then I'm like, oh, let's just having a bit of a laugh. I'm like, hey, do you have anything to say about this thing?
Yeah.
He's like, actually, yeah, like I think it's a good system, because I was against it at the time. I was against mandatory voting. And he's like, yeah, I do actually. And he was explaining how in certain jurisdictions, by not having voting be mandatory, groups like lobbyists and also niche groups will really try to manipulate the voting process and disenfranchise voters that they know will vote against the policy. So what you can have is a minority gaining power and a minority gaining public policy that benefits them but doesn't benefit the majority, because they can try to find ways to manipulate the system to keep the majority from voting, which is what you see in the US with things like gerrymandering and the manipulation of their whole voting process, where but obviously this election meant so much that everybody, no matter how difficult it was, tried to get in to vote. But I've been reading up on the whole American electoral process, and then I think of in terms of Australia. And imagine if that existed in Australia today, like there would be outrage. You know?
Oh, it would be outrage.
We're so lucky we have the Australian Electoral Commission, the AEC, that an independent body that manages the whole voting, and that everybody is forced to vote. So, and in that instance, I can see now that it stops that whole left and right extremes of voting occurring, because generally, if everybody votes, you're going to find a pretty middle ground kind of.
That's right, and the same thing goes for Russia as well. For those who don't know, I was born in Russia but grew up in Australia. In Russia, voting is not mandatory either, and many of you guys know what happens in Russia is a tiny bit different, and these kind of non-mandatory votes. Yeah, it's people really don't vote, and the thing is, election results are skewed. Other political things come into it. Russia's always been very turbulent when it's come to their politics. And I can see the sort of same thing happening in the States. So lucky for us in Australia, we have 25 million people instead of 140 million in Russia and 330 million in the US, where we have these systems in place, we have these bodies, we have all these processes and hoops that people go through. And having traveled the world a fair bit, I've seen what other political systems are like. We have it pretty good in Australia compared to a lot of the countries in the rest of the world. So when people start, bad-mouthing Australia for the way we're doing things, we're actually doing a lot better than a lot of other countries. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And you look at most scales on the world stage. Like I grew up overseas. So I grew up predominantly in Thailand, growing up in Bangkok, and I got to see the underbelly of like how bad the world could be. I think I've lived through, when I was there, lived through a few coups. So there's been a few coups. My family only moved back to Thailand after the military dictatorship ended in 1991. And then we're like, okay, it's a bit more stable now. We can move back now. And it was great for a while because it was under civilian government. And then 2006, I was trying to get home at the time from Australia. Military coup happened, and then another military coup happened in 2012. And then it just gives me such a better appreciation for Australia and the political processes we have, and how good we have it in Australia, like our social systems, our safety nets. And people were like, oh yeah, but it could be better. Well, everything could be better.
That's right.
I wish I had $1 billion.
It's all a matter of perspective, but basic life and human needs, they're taken care of. We have food, we have shelter, we have access to education, we have a really good climate. Whereas in Russia, the climate is not as good as we have it here. But yeah, that's enough about politics. If you guys enjoyed the politics section of today's discussion, just leave a comment below. Let me know what your thoughts are on upcoming political issues. The next thing I want to talk about are viruses, of course. We've had viruses all throughout human history. We've had the Black Plague, we had the Spanish influenza, we had the Ebola virus. We've had tons and tons of different viruses that mutate over time. But now, in a very globalized world, we have the COVID-19 pandemic, which has pretty much changed the way we do business, right? What are your thoughts on the virus?
Oh, it's been a fascinating time. It actually astounds me that I remember a few months prior to this happening, even when it started off in China, because at the time I was working in intelligence role, and we were following this little outbreak in China. And we're like, oh, that's interesting. And then I remember somebody making a comment in the team, and it was like, I bet that would just blow up. And then everybody sort of glassed over that. And then come March, like the whole world was going in a shutdown. It was just absolute anarchy. But even before that, I remember seeing a documentary. I'm pretty sure it's on Netflix, and it's a documentary about pandemics. And in that documentary, scientists were saying, like, we have been so lucky with the avian flu, the swine flu, all these other that could become really bad. And they're saying we don't have enough medical resources, we don't have enough medical systems. I remember watching this exact thing, and then a few weeks later, coronavirus blew up, and I'm like, wow, like, so we knew it was coming. Like, a lot of scientists, a lot of experts, a lot of think tanks had warned the world, but nobody cared. We haven't been proactive,
we've been kind of reactive. Exactly. Been on the back foot, and Corona set us back so far in our budget, in the way that businesses are run, probably in personal lives as well, of family members not being able to see each other, all because these things existed, it went out of control, we didn't have the right processes in place, right? Essentially, yeah.
And even looking at the economic impacts, I mean, Australia's national debt is larger than it was in the Second World War. We're going to spend the next few generations paying off this debt, and we don't even know when an end is in sight. Even if our domestic economy like picks itself back up, like we're a globalized world, we're so reliant on the international economy. But in certain regards, I think it's also opened up our eyes to how we need to protect our economy against unknowns such as this. So I think we are going to become a lot, not significantly, but I think we will become a lot more self-reliant in terms of our domestic production and prepare safety nets in case, not just for viruses, but any sort of other future potential conflict that would limit our economic output and economic production.
We are very lucky in the fact that we're an island nations. We don't have land borders with anyone else, and we are pretty secluded from the rest of the world with a good climate as well. So that makes us very, very lucky. Plus, I think personally, with good leadership comes great response to this virus. Now, what we need to do is we need to learn, I think, to live with the virus or get a vaccine and then get things going again, because we can't be at a standstill forever. Things need to keep moving. What do you think?
I think we're under pretty good leadership, and Scott Morrison has won some amazing points during the pandemic. Like, I think his popularity's increased by, and they did a measurement of all the world leaders, and Scott Morrison has had one of the highest approval ratings of all the world leaders in their response to the pandemic. But the great thing, and I was very surprised, if you think about it, this part of the world contains over a third of the world's population, 2/3 of the world's population lives within the Indo-Pacific region. You got Southeast Asia, you got India, you got China.
250 million people in Indonesia alone.
These are significant population centers. Whilst Malaysia and Indonesia haven't responded so well to the pandemic, but Thailand hasn't had a local spread in 3 months. Singapore is like getting in the clear. Taiwan had it under control. Vietnam had it under control. So to have countries of significant populations, Thailand I think is a population of 69 million, Vietnam 70 million. To have these countries with significant populations, manage it so well. Even Japan, that's 88 million people. New Zealand, Australia, we've actually, and the biggest thing that has been effective in the response is people trust their government to give them the correct information.
Of course, yes.
And like whenever the government tells us something in Australia, we'll listen. What's interesting to see the United States and competing advice from the state government to the federal government to experts, and there's just all these, and nobody trusts their government to give them the right information, so nobody does anything, and it just gets worse and worse. But what I've not really been able to understand is what happened with Europe. And you'd think Europe, quite a stable part of the world, but they're just as bad as the US in terms of the spread there.
That's right, and countries like Sweden, for example, didn't really have a lockdown at all.
Yeah.
They've had a huge number of cases, but they've just continued to operate as they are. So each different European country is taking a different approach to it.
Yeah.
Now, has Sweden done the right thing? I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
Which does bring me to the next topic of international travel. Because, as you know, I love to travel. You love to travel. Yep. We've all had our plans kind of squashed this year with this pandemic. What do you think the future of travel looks like?
Look, right now I'm just hoping that travel bubble does go ahead. Yeah. I know the Morrison government's been talking about a travel bubble with New Zealand, a travel bubble with Japan, South Korea, and even Thailand's made the cut. I didn't think Thailand would make the cut because Thailand actually is so effective, and people would think opposite of Thailand. So it's so funny. All my friends are like, "Oh, is it really bad in Thailand?" I'm like, you'd actually be surprised how germophobic Thais are, despite us having like massive tourism, being heavily reliant on tourism. But Thais are some of the biggest germophobes in the world. Like before pandemic or anything this happened, every Thai, you'd easily be able to find one carrying a personal hand sanitizer, and they'd wash everything. They'd wash their hands. They wouldn't even touch doors. They'd have paper towels in their bag to open doors with. So Thais have always been germophobes. And when I was in Thailand, so I was in Thailand when the pandemic hit hard, and I thought, I've got to get all my friends and go out, surely they'll be up for it. before the government even told them to lock themselves at home, none of my friends would come out. They're like, we don't want to catch the virus.
Yeah, they were proactive.
Yeah, they were proactive before the government even told them to be proactive. So that's why Thailand got it under control straight away, just because they're natural germaphobes. So it was quite interesting that like how that's worked out. But I'm hoping, it opens up with those countries. Japan would be amazing to go to.
That's right, because I'd love to do some more summits with you. I love to do Kilimanjaro. I love to do Everest. A couple of the other major peaks around the world would be quite amazing to do. But brings me to my next topic as well, because we've had such big shifts in politics and travel. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about is IT.
Yeah.
And I know IT has so many different branches that come off it. In one particular, I want to discuss is cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is becoming such an important part of today's society. Can you explain to people what cybersecurity is and what people do that are in it?
So cybersecurity is quite a fascinating area of IT, and it's really started to explode. And I think it's really come to the forefront recently because trying to get into politics of how we had foreign interference laws introduced, how we banned Huawei from building 5G networks here in Australia, and Australia actually took the lead in those kind of laws. A lot of countries didn't even consider that, but Australia, because we were so heavily influenced by China, took the lead and introduced those foreign interference laws and introduced a ban on Huawei, which in turn has now made the US, even though a lot of the US articles write that the US took the lead on it, Australia is actually the first to get on top of, now we are not allowing Huawei. And then when the US saw that, they're like, oh, and they started looking more into Huawei and the influence of the Chinese Communist Party on Huawei and the critical infrastructure that they were going to be building, and realized like, well, hold on a second. And then this ties back to give more context to the Five Eyes, which is Australia, United States, Canada, New Zealand, and United Kingdom, and the intelligence. Well, it started off as an intelligence alliance between the five countries because of World War II, because of the Cold War, which has now grown into something a lot more significant that we don't, like, the media doesn't really touch on, but I think our governments are quite happy that it's not really touched on, it's sort of glossed over, but it's quite a powerful alliance in terms of intelligence sharing. It's significant intelligence sharing. And when the Edward Snowden files came out, the Five Eyes and our intelligence network was part of that investigation. So I think that's why I said a bit hush-hush, because,
of course.
But so cybersecurity in the last year, I'd say in the last 2-3 years, has grown significantly, just because now it allows countries to wage war without even going to war with each other. It allows countries to affect the outcomes of political outcomes. For instance, during the 2016 elections, there was accusations that China and Russia were manipulating US elections. And it's funny though that the West does a lot of calling out of other countries, but at the same time, we do exactly the same. If you look at there's actually a study done that releases the power indexes of cyber warfare and cybersecurity. And the United States is right up there on both receiving and giving, and they've got a lot of capability. But obviously, they try to sell it to the media as like they're the victims in a lot of these.
That's right. We're only doing one side, but we're not doing the other.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a lot of countries are both on the offensive and on the defensive for a multitude of reasons, right? And this evolving cyberspace, I think, we'll see it evolve even more over the next, I'd say, even 1 or 2 years, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And what used to be just like a single dude in your IT department running it, now you require entire departments. And during the pandemic, like our workload went up. Job recruitments are increasing for cyber, even though a lot of other areas. The people losing their jobs. Cybersecurity has not been affected at all. If anything, demand has gone up for cybersecurity specialists. And the more people understand the importance of cybersecurity, the more they realize, we need to take it more seriously, because everything is online now. But in terms of government and in terms of states, it comes down also to government legitimacy. And legitimacy is a big thing that I think we don't take into consideration, that we look at things, because we just sort of take legitimacy for granted. For instance, when we have an election in Australia, and there's a change of party, because we believe it is a legitimate voting system, nobody riots or complains or just like, okay, I guess the other party won, and we take it, and we just take it, and the country moves on, because the whole political process has legitimacy. But then legitimacy doesn't just apply to the political process. Legitimacy of government and the right of the legitimacy of government to to govern over its people comes from the willingness of the government to govern. And if you lose that legitimacy, which if you think about it, it's very easy to achieve through cybersecurity means. Like if you assault, for instance, the Centrelink during the pandemic, so many millions of Australians are relying on Centrelink payments to go through. Imagine if Services Australia got hacked. So Australia got hacked, and people weren't receiving their Centrelink payments. How's that going to look on the Australian government? If an adversary wanted to delegitimize our government, that's one way to go about it. Knocking out power grids, and during these trying times, like that's gonna make the government look bad, delegitimize the government, and then it's going to cause discontent among the population.
Of course.
So no longer do you need to wage war with just arms and munitions. Nowadays, you can do it electronically, sitting from the comfort of your own home. For instance, Iran's nuclear program was set back by 2 years. So what the US did, and they were like, how do we break into Iran's nuclear program? And they couldn't figure out a way. Like Iran locks down pretty hard when it comes to cyber because they've always been getting hit. So then somebody suggested, like, why don't we just drop a bunch of USBs and then see if somebody plugs it in? And they're like, it's so crazy, it might just work. Lo and behold, somebody found a USB, like one of the scientists found a USB, plugged it in, and then the Americans got into the system, spun up the centrifuge, and like set back the Iran nuclear program by 2 years.
Yeah, right.
All from the comfort of their own home. Long gone are the days of James Bond going in and doing the spying.
That's
nowadays,
right.
Just takes a simple USB stick.
That's right. It's data, it's technology, it's all those things, which is quite interesting, and we'll see where this cyber kind of space develops over the next few years. If you've got any cyber questions, please, again, in the comments section, which brings us to the last topic of course, mountaineering. Now, I know that you like to climb mountains, you like to reach summits, and you've got a lot of big plans to summit once we open up borders.
Yeah.
What kind of got you interested in going up mountains and summiting?
When I was living in Thailand, we always used to drive quite a bit. So we lived in Bangkok, but then during our summer holidays and whatnot, we'd go visit the extended family in the country, and so we live. So that's Bangkok, and then we live sort of in the border between the north and northeast of Thailand. We're sort of like central northeast, and it's quite a mountainous region. It's quite beautiful, and I just remember as a young kid sitting in the car looking at mountains, and I'm just like, I wonder what's up there. And it's just that
curiosity.
It's just been one of like my earliest memories, and I remember asking my grandma how mountains are made, and she'd tell me the most outlandish stories about gods and stuff. But I like, you know, and I was just always fascinated with them, and I just always thought, I want to know what's on top of that thing. I want to go on top of that thing, just because I think it'd just be cool. And then it sort of grew from there. Living in Perth, I didn't really get into it much. I was mainly doing uni. I was always away with army, but then moving to Canberra and sort of like getting a bit bored, and I haven't had that many friends there and stuff. So I sort of got out and started exploring more. Yep. And then that sort of led into doing a lot of this season, starting off with just snowboarding, and then making friends, and then that evolved into getting into the backcountry, going climbing and living in the snow, and just absolutely loving it. Just I couldn't think of anything else that I'd want to continue to do for, like, you know, the foreseeable future.
So if someone walks up to you and says beach or mountains, you will choose mountains every day of the week?
Look, I love a good beach, and I love a good beach party, but I'd say if somebody came up to me now, then I reckon I'd go snow and mountains. There's just something so peaceful and serene about being on a mountain, like especially when it's just you and the mountain.
The serenity is
nothing. Yeah. There's just nothing else out there. Like you can't. It's just such a euphoric experience, and just such a peace and calming experience, like Zen. You know, you're just at peace with the world.
It is a pretty awesome experience, and I hope we summit a few mountains together in the future.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. New Zealand open up so we can get there. Mountaineering season's only starting. November to April. That's mountaineering season.
Beautiful. Well, Mr. Alex Gould, thank you very much.
No
You're
worries.
a gentleman and a scholar.
Thank you.
Guys, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.